Hello, welcome to another video blog edition of the Dreizin Report. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't yet checked out my blog, please do so. The web address is in the opening sequence to this video. It's also probably below my face right now. We're going to be starting a YouTube channel, so you can check that out. The web address or the name of the channel should be also under my face right now, if everything works out. So we're going to be branching out into that medium as well. So please check that out. I would like to now talk about the weapons shipments to the Ukraine. It's an important topic. A lot of people have a lot of questions. So the first thing to understand is that the initial tranche of weapons shipments has basically failed. It has had no effect at all on the big picture. And what do we mean by the initial tranche? We mean all of the javelins and the NLAWs and all of the other anti-tank weapons, as well as the Stingers. All of this clearly failed because now they're going for the heavier stuff. So the lighter stuff obviously didn't turn the tide of the war for the Ukraine. They wouldn't be going to now howitzers and HIMARS systems and all that if the other stuff had worked out. So that's important to understand, right? That they're escalating with the heavier hardware because the lighter stuff didn't work out. As far as the javelins are concerned, that was a real disappointment for Uncle Sam. There were literally thousands and thousands of javelins that had been sent to the Ukraine, and I am really unaware of more than just a couple of videos showing them being used and not necessarily even successfully. So the fact is that, even if the real number of successful uses was 10 times higher than the number of videos of successful uses of these weapon systems, nonetheless, it's completely insignificant in the scale of this war. Right, so you have to figure the Ukrainians are putting, documenting everything they can on a smartphone, uploading it to the internet. We see just about everything they do, and yet they really haven't been able to show themselves taking out Russian tanks or other hardware, with these javelins. At least not more than, maybe like literally I could probably count the number of videos probably on one hand, and not all of those uses were successful. Now I might have missed some. It's just not a successful weapon system in the Ukraine war. Why is that? Well, you've probably heard from a lot of other people. I'll just repeat it, that as per many prisoner accounts, Ukrainian prisoner accounts that the Russians have documented, that they simply these systems have been sitting around in U.S. Army warehouses since the 90s, if not the 80s, and apparently the battery packs just don't hold charge anymore. And in fact, it's not even clear that the Ukrainians even knew to charge them all, but regardless, there's many that they thought they charged, and they just don't hold charge. The batteries are 30 plus years old, and apparently they just don't hold charge anymore. So, a wire-guided electronic, wire-guided anti-tank guided missile system evidently doesn't work without a charged power pack. And in this case, a lot of them were just not charged. So that's clearly one problem. There's also the Stinger missiles were actually put to very good use by the Ukrainians in the first days of the war. Absolutely Russian aerial losses of combat aircraft and helicopters were quite a bit higher than the Russians had anticipated. This is a fact. This has been admitted and acknowledged. They were not nearly as high as some of these fantasy accounts that you get from Ukrainian Twitter or from bought and paid for cloak and dagger websites like Oryx in Belgium, which is basically just passing along fake intelligence from NATO, but it was not. There was a certain level of fantasy as far as how many Russian aircraft had been shot down by Stingers. It wasn't as high as had been presented. It was probably in the first week of the war they probably lost, close to 20 aircraft. And then subsequent to that, maybe lost another 15 or 20. So absolutely, some of those, in fact, were on the ground, though. So there absolutely were some losses in aircraft, but they figured it out. They figured it out, and what they do now is they fly very, very low to the point where these Stinger operators, by the time they notice anything, the aircraft is already over their head and well past them. So also, they've been very good about using heat decoys, and in fact, some of these helicopters, my understanding is that they now have multiple decoy packages, so that if they get shot at by one missile, they can deploy decoys. Then they're still flying. They get shot at by another missile, they can deploy more decoys. So the Russians have figured it out, and their combat losses in aircraft are extremely, extremely low since basically early April or so. So that's really been resolved. And you keep in mind, they've deployed about 1,000 aircraft to the theater, fixed wing combat aircraft and rotor wing combat aircraft, about very close to 1,000. And, they've probably lost about 35 or so, almost none within the last month and a half. And so, it's just the Russians have figured it out, and it's not going to make a big difference at this point. So all of these sort of man-portable anti-tank weapons and the anti-aircraft weapons, they've had their day, and they're no longer of any effect, any use at all. So if they ever were, right? So what is the West doing now? What is NATO doing now? Well, they've resorted to shipping more, other weapon systems, typically, higher, heavier, larger gear. They tried with these Switchblade drones first, which are not exactly heavy, but they're these loitering munitions. They're basically these kamikaze drones that you launch them out of a tube, and they search for the nearest tank, and then they enemy tank, and then they attack it, basically fly into it as a sort of as a robot bomb, basically. And so these Switchblades, I believe Ukraine got some hundreds of them, and there's literally not one video in existence showing Ukrainian forces actually successfully using this system to do anything, destroy any tank or kill anybody. I have not seen any such video. I've not even heard of it, in writing. So I know that there's been several cases where they tried to use these systems unsuccessfully, but basically it's just been a waste of money by Uncle Sam. So a lot of these drones, they were most likely destroyed on the ground in warehouses before they could get to the front line, destroyed by Russian cruise missiles. As they're kind of migrating over to the front lines, Russia attacks the warehouses where they kind of spend the night, so to speak. Also, it's possible that Russia's been jamming them. Russia has very advanced and comprehensive frontline enemy electronic signals jamming capability, where it's possible that they're simply jamming these devices. But whatever the fact, these Switchblades, they were supposed to be, after the Javelins failed, these Switchblades were supposed to be like the next big thing that's just going to turn the tide of the war, and it didn't happen. They basically totally fizzled. Big embarrassment for Uncle Sam, and glad that it's Ukraine fighting Russia and not Uncle Sam, right? Because, you'd have a lot of rude surprises for U.S. military personnel there, basically. I mean, stuff doesn't work. So what have they done since? Well, they've started moving artillery systems into the Ukraine, and Russia has been very diligent about bombing Ukrainian rail infrastructure, particularly in the west of the country, specifically bombing the transformers that power Ukraine's electric trains. So they're called traction substations. They provide power to the third rails or the overhead lines. I guess my understanding in Ukraine, it's more overhead lines. But basically, most of the Ukraine's rail trains, locomotives, are in fact electric. About 80% are electric, not diesel. And Russia's been bombing these transformer stations that provide power to them, and that's really substantially brought the rail system in Western Ukraine that ships weapons in from Poland. Basically brought the rail system to a state of chaos. But the fact is that there's enough redundancy in the system that it's kind of hard to completely destroy it. If you wanted to really completely destroy it, they would have to destroy all the bridges all the rail bridges over the Dnieper River, which sort of notionally separates eastern and western Ukraine. And evidently, they don't want to do that because they want those bridges, because they evidently intend to use those bridges. So, short of doing that, it's kind of a bug hunt. But they have succeeded in keeping a lot of the heavier weapon systems, such as MLRS systems and self-propelled guns, self-propelled howitzers, from reaching the front line. The one thing that has really reached the front lines, that's of a heavier nature, if not in the Donbass, then at least in Kharkiv province, is these American 155 millimeter towed howitzers. And people wonder, well, how could you get them in? I mean, Russia would have been bombing them, right? Well, no, because these are towed howitzers. If you have a truck, with a trailer hookup at the back, it's a heavy enough truck. You can basically roll these things in, conveyed by truck, and you can do it one at a time. It doesn't require a railroad or a train to do it. You just bring them in one at a time, hooked up to trucks, and they can travel by road. And they're not tracked. They're not self-propelled, so they're not going to chew up the roads. Russia might get one or two of them, but it's impossible. You can't, in a country of that size, you can't track all road traffic. You could track all rail traffic because there's only really a few rail lines, but you can't track all road traffic. So they've been able to get these in, and it's not gonna have any impact at all. It's not having any impact right now, really. Basically, the mere fact that they have to bring these in really shows you that the Ukraine is out of artillery, right? And it shows you that the claims that it's been Russia that's losing all of this equipment and Ukraine's been doing great, they're completely false. Basically, Russia either destroyed or captured essentially all Ukrainian cannon artillery. They still have quite a bit of rocket artillery, but they've captured essentially or destroyed all of Ukraine's cannons. So Uncle Sam has to send them more. Now the problem with these towed systems is that they're not really very practical when you have when the enemy, in this case Russia, has complete and total dominance in the air. You can't safely. You can't really safely use these systems, right? You can't stay in one place for too long. And so they're not very versatile because rather than having a self-propelled, self-contained, artillery system on tracks that can be moved around, and instead you have these very clunky towed cannon that are basically of generations old vintage, and you have to hook them up to a trailer, and then you bring them to your firing site or wherever you want to set up your battery, and you have to jack their tails up off of the trailer, and then set them up, split the tail, the legs, and stabilize it, and then you load it and shoot, and you have to worry about you don't have a lot of time because you might get hit from the air, right? So basically, the battery, whether it's 3, 4, 5 cannons, can maybe shoot off, 1 shell or 2 shells per cannon at most, and then you got to go. Basically, you have about from the time you start firing, you have maybe 15 minutes before the counter battery radar will detect you, and some nasty surprises will be sent your way. Okay, so it's not a lot of time. So basically, then you have to, fold these things back up. You have to jack the tails back up, get it back on the trailer, right? Get it back on the trailer, hook up, And it's hard work. I mean, it's muscle work. You know, it's a man's work. It's dirty work. And then you have to, you know, drive them out, and you have to drive them out over a road, because these things are not, you know, neither the trucks nor the cannons are on treads, like a self-propelled gun. So they're on wheels, and basically you have to follow a road or maybe a very, very smooth, even field. These are not off-road systems, right? So your range of motion in terms of, I mean, where exactly you can travel is pretty limited. And if you have, you know, enemy spotter drones or aircraft that are watching the roads, then, you know, you're in extreme danger. Whereas if you have a self-propelled gun that can travel on tracks, that can travel off-road and basically carry at least some of its own ammunition inside the turret, it's very versatile. You can basically, if you want to sort of take cover from the air, sort of hide yourself, you can easily back these self-propelled systems, you know, sort of into a forest and shoot out of the edge of the forest. And you know, you just can't do that with a towed gun, or at least not easily. And so again, these are very, very clunky. They have to travel by road. It takes a while to set them up, takes a while to break them down. And you know, there's video now of them being, you know, torn up from the air by Russian aerial assets. So this is not going to turn the tide of the war. These cannons, I mean, this is basically the fact that these cannons have been deployed in eastern Ukraine is an admission that Uncle Sam has not been able to get any better, more modern artillery systems into eastern Ukraine, and this is all they could do. This is the best they could do. Okay, it's basically a walking, talking admission, because you know, in recent decades and even in recent generations, the whole trend, military trend, has been away from towed cannon and towards self-propelled cannons, self-propelled guns, because they're more versatile, they're tracked, they can go off-road anywhere, they carry their own ammo in their turrets, at least some of it, and you know, they can move around much faster and you know, move and shoot from here and then move and shoot from here. Whereas these towed systems essentially have been abandoned by all Western armies. Everybody from the U.S. to the U.K. to Israel. I mean, they've basically, I think these howitzers, I think at this point, they're only being fielded by the U.S. Marine Corps. The U.S. Army does not have any towed artillery at this time whatsoever. Okay, so these are still, you know, conceptually antiquated systems. They're very vulnerable from the air. You saw there were photo back during the Iraq War where there were U.S. Marines that were using these cannon against insurgents holed up in Fallujah, Iraq. But you know, that's Fallujah, Iraq, where the Iraqis had absolutely nothing in the air whatsoever. They had no counter battery radar. They had no planes, no drones, nothing. And of course, if you have nothing to worry about, you as the artilleryman can of course sit there and just hammer away at a defenseless target indefinitely until your ammunition runs out or until they tell you to move. But you know, if you're fighting a modern enemy, these are absolutely impractical weapon systems. They have all Western armies have moved on from towed artillery, and the fact that they're giving it to Ukraine and that they haven't been able to get, you know, any of the more modern, the self-propelled guns into the Ukraine just has failure written all over it. And, you know, very soon, I mean, another week or two, whatever, Russia will basically take these all out of commission. And then Uncle Sam will have to think of something else. And, you know, the latest news now is that Ukrainians are asking for longer range MLRS, the sort of MLRS systems that have a range of 100 plus kilometers. They're also asking for, I mean, aircraft and whatever else. But clearly, if they're asking for, they're just going to keep asking and asking for heavier stuff. And Uncle Sam's eventually probably going to acquiesce to essentially all of their demands. But, you know, by that point, it'll probably be $1 short and a day late, as we've seen consistently in this pattern of escalation in the last few months. in this war. Just a really quick update from the fronts. The Russian forces have very quickly moved west of Popasna, which, as per one of my last videos, it was a good-sized town in northern Lugansk province that was holding up the southern end of the Severodonetsk-Lysychansk bulge. The Ukrainian-held bulge in North Lugansk. Popasna fell. Now the Russians have pressed the advance. They have moved roughly 14-15 kilometers west of Popasna to threaten the one main road going into Lysychansk, without which the Ukrainians really can't function. That's their supply road, their evacuation road, and so basically we are looking at another cauldron of probably, on the same scale in terms of the encauldroned personnel, in terms of the surrounded Ukrainian personnel, probably roughly on the same scale as the Mariupol cauldron. This is what the Russians do. They surround you, they digest you slowly, and then eventually either you die or you surrender. So this is just how they operate. This is textbook, and foreign, especially Anglo-American analysts and all these clown generals on Fox and CNN, they just don't get it. They don't get it because their history, their career history has basically been since at least the since the 1991 Iraq War. What America has done is basically a bunch of aerial operations, bombing people into submission, as well as a bunch of bug hunts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And not to take away from the achievements of individual soldiers or officers in those countries, the fact is that these were bug hunts. These were not real maneuver warfare operations. And Russia is doing maneuver warfare. It's slow going because the enemy is exceptionally well dug in and is using, for the most part, weaponry that is way above the level of anything that the Taliban or the Iraqi insurgents had. But nonetheless, Russia's progressing. We're going to see another cauldron here. Basically, the defenses now, the Ukrainian defenses on the southern flank of the Severodonetsk-Lysychansk bulge are collapsing. They are buckling, they are giving in, and it's clearly now just a matter of, some days or a week or whatever, 2 weeks, I'm not going to, guess, but before those Ukrainian forces are cut off. And then, of course, the front in northern Donetsk is going to even out, and Slavyansk and Kramatorsk are next on the plate, after which, essentially, the Ukraine is basically toast. So we'll see, how long it takes, but the writing is already on the wall. Thank you so much for watching. Please do, if you can, check out my blog, of course, and my YouTube channel. Thank you.